What's up, everybody? Today is Q&A episode 107. So remember, if you like the Q&As, smash the like button for the algorithm. Otherwise, I will force you to listen to 8 hours of Baby Shark on loop until you cry. How do you go about buying clothes if you plan to continually get bigger in the long term? Well, honestly, I think perhaps you're overcomplicating this because it's not like you're going to move up a shirt size every single year, especially if you're natural. However, this is going to depend a lot on whether you need like professional clothes for work, in which case, like, you're pretty much just going to have no choice, right? You're going to have to buy maybe like a half a size up from what you actually are. And when you outgrow it, you're going to have to buy more every time. So for me personally, I'm a double XL or a triple XL when I'm like fully bulked, peak bulk. But when I'm leaner, I'm as small as an XL, depending on how lean I am. So even clothes that I bought a long time ago for previous bulks, now they're my diet clothes. And so it's only when I reach all-time new levels of size do I have to buy new clothes. Otherwise, I can just wear old clothes that fit in the moment. Is doing a movement once every 14 days too big of a gap? Is there a certain threshold that you'd recommend? Usually I try to limit that to every 10 to 11 days because we do have some data to suggest that detraining is going to occur once you get to that 14-day mark. And it's going to be really hard to become technically proficient at something doing it once every 14 days. But an exception could be something like conventional deadlifts where you already have well-established technique. Then you can probably get away with it in that case. During a hypertrophy phase, is it best to leave some SBD in there for technique maintenance, or should you take it out altogether and come back to it at the end of your hypertrophy phase? So if you would have asked me this 5 or 6 years ago, I would have told you that you should have SBD in some form year round. Now I completely disagree with that. Especially like if you're a typical powerlifter who's taking a very short off season, like 8 weeks, you're not going to get that much hypertrophy anyway, no matter what you do, but you're going to get way less if you try to do low bar and your competition deadlift technique and arch benching. Take that stuff out. Yes, you're going to have a detraining effect on your technique, but you should still be doing a 16 to 20 week meet prep after that, where you're going to get back all of those neurological adaptations during your high frequency SBD meet prep. Make the hypertrophy phase a real hypertrophy phase. Replace sumo deadlifts with stiff leg deadlifts. Replace bench with Larson press with a cambered bar, etc. Come back to it in meet prep. What is the best way to start following the NBA? How do I find out when games are on and things like that? So the first thing you probably want to do is just go to NBA.com. The regular season starts in like mid to late October, and that's when games will start being played, and you can see the schedule for any given night on NBA.com. As far as how to start watching, I mean, probably the best games to watch are going to be like the premier games that are carried on the big sports networks. TNT has games every Thursday night, and those would be some good games to watch each week to see if you like those. But yeah, I mean, generally you can follow along on the internet to find out most of the information that you're talking about here in terms of like the schedule. You can find some articles to read from writers. It's going to make you more educated. So yeah, give NBA.com a try. Does the hip abduction machine have carryover to squat patterns? So just so we're all on the same page here, the hip abduction machine is the one where you push your legs out against resistance. That has absolutely no carryover whatsoever in my experience. Now, if you really meant to talk about the adductor machine where you push your legs in against resistance, assuming we're talking about a powerlifting low bar squat context, it has massive carryover as the adductors are probably the prime mover in most low bar squats. Should I pair an RDL with a pendulum squat or a hack squat if I'm doing both on the same day? Does this matter? I don't think this matters very much at all. A hack squat and a pendulum squat are practically the same movement. The only small argument that I can make is that a hack squat and an RDL are both going to challenge the hip extensors to some extent in a lengthened range, whereas the pendulum squat is more mid-range biased, so it could be slightly less redundant for glutes and adductors, but that's it. For one that runs and lifts, do you think doing your running on the same days as lower body training can consolidate the stress and allow you more time for recovery between leg sessions. Yes, it can to a degree, but there's something very important that you have to keep in mind, which is that the adaptations that are made from running are going to directly interfere with the ones made from lifting. So if you're going to do that, you need to separate, or you should separate, your running and your leg training into AM, PM sessions to minimize the interference effect both inter and intra session. How can I tell if a muscle group is recovered? Honestly, it's mostly just going to be determined by whether or not you can successfully, progressively overload whatever movement that you're training. But you may want to take into consideration whether or not the muscle is extremely sore and whether or not you feel any other types of disruption in that muscle, such as it feeling extremely heavy or twitchy or spasmy. Because sometimes when you're doing a brand new movement, you can make neurological gains and still progress a movement, even though that muscle isn't recovered. And for hypertrophy purposes, you don't want to train a muscle that isn't fully recovered. I've seen people putting deadlifts on their back days. What are your thoughts on this? Well, I've seen people doing 50 sets of arms and calling that an entire workout. What are your thoughts on that? All right, I'll humor you and actually pretend you asked an answerable question. So we'll do this. Is it a good idea to put your deadlifts on back day? It can be. It depends on the totality of the split, right? So you can train back and hamstrings on the same day. Personally, that's generally not how I like to do it. I tend to try to consolidate axial fatigue to my lower body training days because no matter what squat pattern that you pick, assuming that you're doing a squat pattern or even a leg press pattern, there's going to be some lower back fatigue. If you place deadlifts on your quote unquote back day and you're not doing a body part split where you train each body part once a week, generally that means you're going to have a maximum of 72 hours between the time where you deadlift and where you have to train legs, or vice versa. So for example, like let's say you do push-pull legs. If you train deadlifts, then 24 hours later, you're going to train legs. You pretty much cannot train free squats productively. You're going to have to choose a hack squat or a pendulum. And even then, you'll still get some axial fatigue interference. Even if you do like the Jordan Peters split and go push, pull, off, legs off, you're still trying to do a squat pattern only 48 hours after a heavy deadlift. And you're going to, again, be limited to machines if you want to have a productive workout, which isn't necessarily a problem if you don't do free weights. But again, it's just not my preferred way of doing things. I like to consolidate axial fatigue to lower days. When should one consider making a movement harder to manage absolute load? Basically, whenever you need a recovery boost. So if you have one movement that you can no longer progress on your current split because it's become too frequent due to how strong you've become, or when you have one movement that's interfering with your recovery and progression on other movements, that's when you want to reach for a variation that's going to be more specific to a single muscle group to help manage absolute load. Just like the example that you use here, you would move from a conventional deadlift to something like a stiff-legged deadlift, get a better hamstring SFR, and save some lower back fatigue in the process. Alrighty, folks, that is the end of today's Q&A. So, as always, if you like the Q&A, please remember to like the video when it comes out on YouTube for the algorithm. If you'd like to become a more substantial supporter of the Q&A, I'll put a link up to my Patreon, which you can join for $1 a month. If you'd like to work with me directly for coaching, just shoot me a DM on Instagram or look for my email in the description box on YouTube. Likewise, if you want to check out any of my ebooks, the link to do that is in my bio on Instagram and in the description box on YouTube. I will be back on Friday with another full body session as always. So, have fun getting through the rest of your week, I guess. Peace.